The next time you get sick, you're going to reach for a little box of pills. You'll swallow something engineered in a lab, tested on thousands of people, and you won't think twice about it. But for almost the entire history of our species, that box didn't exist. There were no pills, no doctors, no hospitals, not even a word for medicine. So what did your ancestors actually do when their bodies broke down? When the fever came? When the wound turned black? When the tooth started to rot? The answer is stranger and older than you think, and it changes what the word human even means. Let's start with a man who lived around 49,000 years ago in what is now northern Spain. We know him only from his bones, and his bones tell us he was in agony. He had an abscess rotting one of his back teeth, and his gut was full of parasites. He had no way to understand what was happening to him, but he did something about it. When scientists analyzed the hardened plaque still stuck to his teeth, they found traces of two things. The first was poplar. Poplar bark contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. The second was a mold, a blue-green mold from the penicillium family, the same family of fungus we would one day use to create the world's first antibiotic. Sit with that for a second. 49,000 years ago, a creature we dismissed for over a century as a brutish caveman was dosing himself with aspirin and penicillin. He had no idea what a molecule was, but somehow he knew these things made the pain stop. And here's the part that should unsettle you. He wasn't even the beginning of the story, because medicine is older than humans. We didn't invent it, we inherited it. Watch a sick chimpanzee sometime. When their stomach is full of parasites, they do something they never do when healthy. They seek out a specific bitter plant, fold its rough, bristly leaves, and swallow them whole without chewing. The leaves scrape the parasites out of their gut on the way through. They don't do this for food. The plant has almost no nutritional value. They do it as treatment. Scientists have a name for this: zoopharmacognosy, animals using the natural world as a pharmacy. So the instinct to heal your own body isn't a human invention. It's millions of years older than we are. Which means when that Neanderthal chewed poplar bark for his toothache, he was following a program written long before his kind ever walked the earth. But our ancestors did something the chimpanzees never did. They didn't just swallow plants. They picked up blades. All over the world, archaeologists keep finding ancient human skulls with holes in them. Not from injury, not from violence. Holes that were carefully, deliberately cut, using nothing but stone tools on a living person with no anesthetic. The practice is called trepanation, and it's thousands of years old. Now, you might assume nobody could survive something like that, but here's how we know they did. In many of these skulls, the bone around the hole has grown back. It's smooth, rounded, healed. And healed bone only happens in a living body, which means the patient didn't just survive the surgery, they lived for years afterward. Someone opened a human skull in the Stone Age, and the person got up and walked away. And in a cave in Borneo, they found something even harder to believe: the skeleton of a young person whose lower leg had been amputated, cleanly, surgically, around 31,000 years ago. And once again, the bone had healed. This child lost a leg to a stone blade and then lived for years. Think about what that actually required. Someone knew how to cut through a limb. Someone knew how to stop the bleeding. Someone knew how to keep that wound from getting infected and killing them. 31,000 years ago, before farming, before writing, before the wheel. But the most human thing our ancestors did wasn't the surgery. It was quieter than that, and it leaves behind a very particular kind of evidence. In a cave in Iraq, researchers found the skeleton of a Neanderthal man. We call him Shanidar 1, and his body reads like a list of disasters. A crushing blow to the left side of his face had probably left him blind in one eye. His right arm was withered and, at some point, amputated below the elbow. He likely had significant hearing loss. He walked with a severe limp. Now picture that. A blind, one-armed, half-deaf man in the Ice Age, surrounded by predators that could see in the dark. By every brutal law of survival, this man should have died young and alone, but he didn't. His injuries had healed, his bones had aged. He lived for years, maybe decades, in that broken condition. There is only one way that happens. Someone fed him. Someone sheltered him. Someone protected a man who could no longer hunt, could no longer fight, could no longer contribute anything to the group's survival. Someone looked at their weakest, most useless member and decided he was worth keeping alive anyway. That is not survival of the fittest. That is the exact opposite of it. And it might be the oldest evidence we have of what we would now call love. For hundreds of thousands of years, all of this knowledge lived in one place only: human memory. It was passed down by voice from elder to child around fires. And every time an elder died, an entire library of healing died with them. Until we learned to write. More than 3,000 years ago in Egypt, scribes filled a scroll we now call the Ebers Papyrus with hundreds of remedies. Some of it was magic and superstition, but a surprising amount of it worked. They used honey on wounds, which we now know actually kills bacteria. They used willow for pain, the aspirin plant again. In ancient Mesopotamia, healers pressed lists of symptoms and treatments into clay, creating the first diagnostic manuals in history. For the first time, medicine could outlive the healer. And then, about 1,000 years ago, in the Islamic world, a physician named Ibn Sina did something no one had managed before. He took all of it: the Greek knowledge, the Persian, the Indian, the folk remedies, the careful observations, and he organized it into a single system. His book, the Canon of Medicine, became the standard text used to train doctors across 3 continents for the next 600 years. So look at the whole line now: a chimpanzee swallowing a bitter leaf, a Neanderthal chewing bark for the pain in his jaw, a stone blade taking a leg, and the child living. A blind man kept alive by people who refused to let him go. A scroll, a clay tablet, a book that outlasted empires. And then a lab, a pill, and the little box you'll reach for the next time you're sick. That is one unbroken line stretching back millions of years. And you are standing at the very end of it. We like to tell ourselves that we became human when we picked up the first weapon. But plenty of animals kill. Almost none of them do the other thing. Maybe we didn't become human the day we learned to take a life. Maybe we became human the day one of us knelt down beside someone who could give nothing back. Someone sick, broken, useless to the hunt, and decided to keep them alive anyway. Everything else, the plants, the surgery, the scrolls, the hospitals, the entire towering machine of modern medicine, is just that single impulse, refined over 50,000 years. So here's the thought I'll leave you with. If being cared for when you're weak is the oldest human thing there is, if it's the very thing that made us who we are, then why does asking for help still feel like weakness? Think about it, and I'll see you in the next one.